guys, welcome to yet another episode of Microsoft ERP Beginners Tutorial Series. In this episode, we are going to look into how to manually add the handling charges, the freight charges, the insurance charges to a purchase order using charge codes in Microsoft Dynamics 365. So with that note, let's get started with the episode. So in order to get started with the charge code, get into the procurement and sourcing module and get into the charges section. Click on the charge code. I'm going a little faster, but you can pause the video and have a look at the path if it's way too fast. Then click on the add charge code to add a charge code. So as I mentioned before, we are going to do a demo based on two scenarios. One scenario is going to be for the handling charges that's getting added on top of the purchase price, and another scenario is going to be a freight charge that's getting added on top of as a part of your purchase order price. Okay, so let's first explore the handling charges. So in the scenario of a handling charges, on top of your purchase price, let's say your purchase price of a particular item is $100, but the vendor would like to charge an additional $10 of a fixed amount, which is going to be the vendor processing fee or vendor handling fee. So in such case, your total invoice for your purchase order is going to be $110 inclusive of the handling fee or a processing fee. So you will be liable to pay the vendor not the $100 but $100 plus the additional handling fee of $10, that is $110 to the vendor. So if you wanted to do such a scenario, then you need to create a charge code firstly with a relevant name. In this case, it's going to be the handling charges. So let's name it handling, and the description could be handling fee. So as I mentioned, I will be paying to the vendor. So this particular charge needs to be credited to the vendor account. So in this scenario, we need to choose under the credit side the vendor itself. So when I choose a vendor on the credit side, what happens here is the handling fee will be credited to the vendor. The handling fee will be a part of your vendor invoice, or in other words, the handling fee will be also added to the vendor balance. So in such a scenario, if you want to charge back to your vendor, then you might need to choose the vendor in the credit section. So I'm going to choose the vendor in the credit section for this scenario. And I do not need to choose any posting type or account if I'm choosing vendor. Okay, so I'm going to leave them blank. And in the debit side, I have multiple options over here. So I'm going to choose item as an option here. So if I choose an item as an option, the handling charges will also be added as a part, or it will be added as a cost price to the item. So all this handling fee will actually get posted to a specific item in the purchase order line. This particular charges will be ultimately allocated. During the demo, you will notice it. These charges will be allocated to the purchase order line to multiple items, right? So this handling charges, if you want this handling charges to be added into the cost price or buried into the cost price of the item, then you need to choose item as your debit type. Okay, so if I choose an item as a debit type, what happens is, even if the item cost is $100 and it is having an handling charges of $10, ultimately into your ledger books, $110 will be posted as a cost price of your item, which is again very helpful to understand the final landed cost of the particular item. Okay, if you want to follow such a logic, then you need to choose an item here as your debit type. So which means that the cost will be debited to your asset account. So asset account increases by debit, as we know, and it will then be credited to your vendor. Okay, just in case, in some cases, we do not want to add the the additional charges as a part of your item cost price. In this example, it's a handling fee, but it could even be an internal miscellaneous fee or a service fee which you do not really want to add as a part of a cost price of an item, because it doesn't make sense, because it is just an additional add-on fee and you do not want to relate it with an item. In such cases, you can even choose a ledger account and choose a relevant account and park the cost price aside in a specific account. In such cases, it won't be posted into the item cost price. It won't be posted as a inventory cost into that item. Okay, if you are having such a scenario, then you might need to change the debit type a little bit. So in this case, I'm going to post the cost price into the item cost. We will see this scenario while we do it, and you will understand better, just in case if you did not get the concept now. Okay, so this is one scenario, and we will be doing the one scenario. This is for the handling fee. So let me save this. And again, this checkbox over here, it is we will do review this and test this when we are into the invoice matching topic, because it's related with the invoice matching. Just in case if you do any changes to your charge code during your invoicing, then there will be a difference between the charges in the purchase order line and the purchase order invoice. So in such cases, the users will be warned based on this parameter if it's turned on and if it's inside a specific tolerance limit. If it is turned on, then it won't be warned. So we will look into the invoice this topic when we are looking into the invoice matching later. Okay, so for now, let's focus on the core topic, which is handling fee. Hope you understand the handling fee scenario better now. So now let's also explore another scenario, which is the freight charges. Okay, freight, and let's just name it as freight charges. Okay, so the second scenario, as I mentioned before, is going to be an additional charge getting added to a purchase order, and this time it is a transportation charge. Let's say that we are trying to move a consignment from the supplier location to our location, and for moving it, we are engaging a third party transportation company for doing the transportation. So we might need to pay the third party transportation company. So in this case, this charges will be paid not to the vendor but to the third party company. So this charges will not be a part of your vendor invoice or a vendor balance. So this is a third party freight charge. So for the third party freight charge, again, under the debit type, you will be in this example using the item, because I also wanted to include the transportation cost of the item as a part of the cost price of the item, so that I get the final landed price of the item properly. So I want to bury the cost price into the item, so I'm choosing the debit type as item in this case. Whereas in a case of a credit type, I will not be choosing vendor here, because if I choose vendor, then the freight charges will be a part of your vendor invoice. So in this case, it's charged to a third party company, right? So you need to choose a ledger account, okay, a specific ledger account which represents the relevant charges. So first choose the ledger account and define a posting type, any relevant posting type. It could be order freight. So this posting type is only for the sake of reference. When this particular transaction is posted to the general ledger against the voucher, it will be easier for us to understand what kind of line it is and posting it is by reading the description against the posting type. We will see where it populates when we review the voucher after we post everything. So it is just for the sake of information. And the account is where we will be tagging a proper transportation account. So I'm going to look for expense account. Let's say transportation charges. It's going to be the account which will be credited once we post the purchase order. Okay. So the thing is, you do not get confused that I'm actually tagging an expense account, which is our transportation charges in the credit side. This is just a control account. So your transportation charges will be temporarily parked inside this particular account. When you post the invoice, or when the third party freight company issue the invoice to you and you post the invoice in the system, this account will automatically be debited and the amount will be credited to the relevant vendor's account, that is to the transportation company's account. So this will be soon reversed. Okay, this is just a control account which stores the value temporarily at the moment. Okay, so that is the need of the credit side. So now we have created two charge codes. Let's save it. And now let's see how we do a scenario now and see how this works. So let me create a purchase order. So for creating a purchase order, we need to get into the procurement module, and this is a manual charge code process. We will look into an automatic charge code in the next episode. So let's get into the procurement and sourcing. Expand all, purchase order. Let's add a new purchase order, create a vendor, add a vendor to the purchase order. Let it be this, or maybe I will use another vendor, maybe the first one, because we have most of the trade agreement set up for the first vendor. And let's create a warehouse and tag the warehouse. The site will be automatically populated. So the purchase order is now created. Let's add an item. Let's add the gasket as an item. Okay, that's just a warning, and it is of unit price 100, and so that's the item that we have added. So now on top of this $100, we are also charging an additional handling fee, as we know. So how do we add a handling fee to the purchase order? It's through the purchase tab and click on the maintain charges button. So here you pick a charge manually because it's a manual charge. So in this scenario we are looking into the handling fee. So the handling charge code is something that we've just created, which is this one. Remember, we have created it for item and vendor, so we've added it, and it is going to be a fixed fee in this case. So I'm going to keep the category as fixed and add a $10. Just in case if you want to charge on a percentage basis, like 10% of the purchase value or 20% of the purchase value, you can choose percentage and put the percentage here. So in this example I'm going to keep it very simple. So let's look into the fixed category first, and that's the $10. So this is pretty much it. Just save it, and you have now added a charge code to the header level of the purchase order. Okay, so how do we cannot see the charge code here in any of this line. In order to view the charge code, one way is if you go into the purchase tab and click on the totals section, you will be able to see that the total value, that is the total purchase price is $100, and we are applying a $10 of the charge code, that is the additional handling fee. So the total is going to be 110 in this example. Okay, so the charges populate in this section when you have a charges added to a purchase order. Okay, so so that's about the charge code. And be mindful that at the moment we have only added the charge code in the header level of the purchase order in the maintain charges section. So this charges which is in the header level of the purchase order needs to be transferred to the line level within the purchase order. Okay, because we know that the charge codes are debited to the item line, to the specific item's cost price, right? So it needs to be allocated to a specific individual line within a purchase order, and it cannot reside in a header level in a purchase order. So in order for us to allocate into the line level, we need to click on the allocate charges button. But before even allocation, let's have a quick look. For that, you need to go into the financial section and get into the maintain charges button, and you see that there are no charges applied to the line. So which means we haven't allocated the charge code to the line level. So let's do the allocation. Click on the allocate charges button. So as soon as you click on the allocate charges button, you will be given multiple options on what basis you want to allocate it, either based on the net amount or quantity, or on the per line basis. So you can choose your criteria for the charge allocation, any one of this. Likewise, would you like to allocate the charges to all the lines in the purchase order? In this example, we have only one item line, but in reality you may even have 10 item line. So do you like to add the charges to all the lines? If yes, then you need to choose an option all. Or maybe we also have an option to add for the positive line and the negative line, meaning let's say that you have the return orders, that is vendor returns in a purchase order. The vendor return lines will normally be negative, in the negative quantity. So if you just want to apply the charge code only to those return lines, it could be a vendor restocking fee that needs to be applied on top of every vendor return we do, right? So in such cases, you might choose an option negative lines, where the charge code will only be applied to all those negative vendor return lines. If you choose positive, then just in case if you want to exclude any negative lines if they reside in the purchase order, you can choose positive line. But I am going to choose all lines because I only have one line at the moment in the purchase order. Likewise, if you click on the stocked checkbox, then the charges will only apply to lines which are in the stocked status. That is, all those tangible items will be applied with a handling fee, because it doesn't just make sense, because a purchase order could have a tangible item and even have a labor charges or a non-tangible service items inside as a purchase order line, and it doesn't really make sense to add a handling fee to a service item or a labor charges. So you normally put a processing fee or handling fee only to a tangible item. So in such cases, if you feel that your purchase order is going to be a combination of those service items and tangible item, then it's better to click on the stocked checkbox, so that it will, so handling fee only be applied to those items which are in the stocked status. And to give you more flexibility, you want to apply the charges only to a specific line and you wanted to choose it, then you may need to click on this particular checkbox, and that checkbox will give you an option to include or exclude any particular line from applying additional handling charges. So this is very handy when you have hundreds of lines and you only want to apply the handling fee to 2 lines in the purchase order. So you can manually choose those 2 lines by clicking on show selection option. Okay. So so that's about the allocation. In this case, I'm going to allocate the charge to the line by clicking on the allocate button. So once the charge is allocated to the purchase order, you might get into the finance section and click on the maintain charges, and you will see that the charges are appearing here. Previously it was not appearing because it was not applied at the line level, it was only applied at the header level, and now it is applied successfully into your line level, so which is $10, a fixed fee, right? And if you now go and check the header level, and you will, if you go and check the header level, you will see that there is no charges here. It's disappeared. Previously it was there, but now it's moved to the line level, so it's no more available in the header level. Okay, so that's about the the handling charges. So another thing which I already showed you is you need to make a note is the total is becoming 110 because the vendor will be invoicing us for $110, not for $100, because in this example the charges will be included as a part of vendor invoice. Okay, so that's the reason why the total is 110. Okay, so once you invoice this particular purchase order, you will see that the purchase invoice is created not for $100 but for $110 in this particular scenario. But unfortunately I may not be able to invoice this purchase order yet because we are in the middle of our setup and we have not yet configured the posting profiles for this vendor, so we may not be able to proceed with the invoice in this legal entity. But to just show you the example, I have already created a transaction in another legal entity, which is DEMF, a German legal entity. Let me quickly show you how it looks like after we invoice a purchase order. Let me go into the procurement and sourcing module, click on all purchase orders, and the purchase order is this one. So you see that the item is added already and it's already invoiced. The purchase order is invoiced. So item is for $10, sorry, $100, and you will see that the charge code has been applied to the item, which is of $10, and I've already invoiced this purchase order. So let's get into the invoice section and click on the invoice journal, and you will see that the invoice is generated not for $100 but for $110. And also you check the voucher, you will see that the $110 is posted to the asset account, which is your which is the $110 is getting debited to your item, because on the debit side we have provided item, so it is debited to your item, and on the credit side $110 is getting credited to your vendor account. This is your accounts payable vendor account, so it's getting credited from your vendor account. Okay, 110, because the $10 is included as a part of vendor invoice. And maybe to also give you more clarity into it, you can just check your item transaction as well. So if you get into the items, and manage inventory transactions, you will see that the cost amount is not 100 but 110. It also includes the charge code. And likewise, if you also check the let's check the vendor. How do I go to the vendor? I think let's get into the vendor from here. And if you get into the vendor and check the vendor balance, you will see that the vendor balance is for $110, because I've still not made the payment to the vendor, and the vendor also includes the $10 of handling fee, because we need to pay it to the vendor. So now let's explore our second scenario and let's create a purchase order in our original legal entity. So let's see how it behaves. So second scenario is the freight charges, that is the transportation charges, which we will be not charging to the vendor but to the third party company. Okay, so if you remember the setup for the freight charges, we are putting against a specific expense account, the credit side, and debit side is debited to the item cost. So let's quickly create a purchase order. Oh, sorry, I will just choose the first one. And that's going to be the warehouse, and site is automatically filled. Click on OK. and let's add an item. Let's again add the same item for this example as well. So in this example, $100. Okay, and we have not applied any charge code yet, so even if you can if you see and check in the financial section, you will see there are no charges applied. So now let's go ahead and apply freight charges. For applying the freight charges, we need to get into the maintain charges section and choose the freight as an option here, and in this case I'm going to make it on the basis of a percentage, which is 10% of the purchase order line. And this is just very simple setup, and it's done now. This is a manual process, that's why we are keying in manually. Automatic process doesn't require to key in manually. We will look into it in the next episode. And just close it and allocate it to all the lines and click on allocate button and get into the finance maintain charges. You will see that the 10% labor charges is applied from the header to the line level. Okay, so once it is applied to the line level, the only proof we have that about the charge code is by checking from the financial section under the maintain charges. Okay, but this additional $10 of the charge on top of 100 will not appear anywhere. Example, if you go into the total section in the form, you will see that there is only $100. There are no charges, and it is directly the total amount is only $100 because we owe the vendor only $100, whereas the $10 of charge is owed by the freight management company and not the vendor. So that's the reason why it's not included as a part of your vendor charges. To just give you again the same example, let me go into another purchase order from a different legal entity, DMF, that I have already invoiced with a freight charges which is not charged to the customer, that is to the vendor. So if you see this particular purchase order, it's only for $100 and not for $110, and you will see that the invoice journal is again posted to the $100 and not $110, and even in the vouchers we see that the voucher is again having only the $100, whereas the $10, the $100 is credited to the specific account, and again the $10 is separate and it is now credited to this particular account. Okay, we have actually defined this account in the freight charges section. Of course, this is a different legal entity, so it basically takes the account that I have defined here. So so this account is something which is defined within the credit section in the charge code. The 10% of the charges is posted separately into that account, whereas the total amount which is payable that you owe to the vendor is posted separately into the accounts payable. Okay. As soon as we receive our invoice and post our invoice, this will be reversed from this particular account, nullified, and will be posted into your credited to your vendor and debited to a proper expense account or a freight account in the system. Okay, so this is again another quick example I wanted to show you in another legal entity. But again, and one more thing I wanted to show you is if I get into this particular item and just get into the item master, transactions into the item, you will see that the cost price will still be posted into the item. Okay, because anyways, as per the charge code formula, the cost price will still be debited to the item. Okay, but if you would have changed it to a specific vendor account, then you may not be seeing this behavior, and it will still be showing 100 as the cost price, but now it is 110 as a cost price of the final cost price of the item is is possibly achieved because of our charge code setup, which is pointing to the item in the debit side. Okay, so again, when I go back and see the total section, you will not see the 10% charges. You will only see the $100, which is for this particular purchase order. And another quick show I wanted to show is, let's get into the header level to find our vendor. Just get into the vendor and check the vendor balance. You will see that the vendor balance is not for 110, but it is only for $100, because the $10 belongs to another vendor. So these are the concepts, the basic concepts that everybody need to understand about the charge code. This is about the manual charge code, but in the next episode we will do a similar scenario using an automatic charge code functionality in Microsoft Dynamics 365. Until then, thanks for watching this video. See you again in the next video.